In small-town Peoria, Illinois, a 72-year-old widow was about to face devastating betrayal. What started as preparing Sunday dinner took a shocking turn when her son declared her just a burden. Lydia Hoffman wasn't your typical grandmother. For 40 years, she had dedicated her life to teaching, known for quiet strength and sacrifice. When she encountered her son's cruel ultimatum about assisted living, she had no idea she was walking into a calculated plan. Lydia's dignified response would lead to complete family transformation. What began as unconditional love would become a lesson about self-worth. Peoria would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Lydia Hoffman's arthritic fingers traced the edge of her grandmother's china as she set the dining room table, each piece placed with the careful precision of 40 years teaching elementary school. The good silverware caught the afternoon light streaming through lace curtains she'd sewn herself 3 decades ago, back when Michael was still young enough to help her reach the higher shelves. The pot roast had been in the oven since dawn, slow cooking until it would fall apart at the touch of a fork, the way Michael had loved it as a boy. Yorkshire pudding waited in the warming drawer, golden and perfect. Green beans from her garden, mashed potatoes whipped with real butter and cream, gravy made from scratch. Every dish a labor of love, every preparation a small act of defiance against the arthritis that made her joints scream in protest. "Mom, we're here," Michael's voice carried from the front door, followed by the familiar shuffle of feet being wiped on the mat she'd crocheted last winter during the long, lonely evenings. Lydia smoothed her navy dress, the one Michael had complimented once, years ago, and forced a smile as her family entered. Michael looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. Ashley followed behind him, her expensive handbag clutched tight, her gaze already sweeping the room with that particular expression Lydia had learned to recognize. Assessment. Judgment. The look of someone calculating the cost of everything she saw. "Something smells wonderful, Grandma Lydia," Madison said, and for a moment, the girl's genuine warmth cut through the tension that had become their family's constant companion. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lydia reached for her granddaughter's hand, noting how Madison glanced nervously at her parents before squeezing back. "I made all your favorites." Ashley's laugh had sharp edges. "All our favorites? Mom, you really didn't need to go to all this trouble. We could have just picked up something." "It's no trouble," Lydia replied quietly, though her wrists ached from the morning's preparations. "It's Sunday dinner. It's what we do." "What we used to do," Ashley corrected, settling into her chair with theatrical care. "Things change, you know. People's schedules get busier. Dietary restrictions become more important." She gestured vaguely at the spread. "I mean, all this butter and cream." "Michael's doctor has been very clear about his cholesterol." Michael said nothing, his attention fixed on his phone screen. Their teenage son, Lydia, still struggled to connect this sullen stranger with the little boy who used to beg for stories, slumped in his chair, earbuds creating his own private world. Lydia began serving, her movements careful and measured despite the tremor in her hands that had grown more pronounced in recent months. "How's the business, Michael?" "Fine." His response was clipped, distracted. "Busy. The Henderson project is keeping him up nights," Ashley added, her tone suggesting this was somehow Lydia's fault. "These Sunday dinners really eat into our family time. The kids have homework, I have clients to call. It's just a lot." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lydia had heard variations of this complaint for months now, each iteration more pointed than the last. She continued serving, pretending not to notice how Ashley picked at her food, making small sounds of disapproval. "The roast is a little dry," Ashley announced, cutting into the meat with unnecessary force. "Maybe less time in the oven next time?" Lydia's chest tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I'll remember that." "And this gravy." Ashley lifted her spoon, letting the rich brown sauce drip back into the boat. So heavy. Do you know how many calories are in this? Madison shifted uncomfortably. Mom, it tastes fine to me. You're 16, honey. You can eat anything and bounce right back. The rest of us aren't so lucky. Ashley's smile was razor thin. Right, Mom? The way she said Mom, with that particular inflection that made it sound like an accusation, sent a chill through Lydia. This woman had been calling her mom for 15 years, but it had never sounded quite like this, like she was humoring a child. The house is looking a little tired, Ashley continued, her gaze roaming over walls that had held a lifetime of memories. Have you thought about updating? Some fresh paint, maybe new curtains? These old lace ones are so dated. Lydia's hands tightened on her napkin. Those curtains had been a wedding gift from her mother. She'd hung them in the first apartment she'd shared with Robert, then carried them through 3 homes, finally to this house where she'd raised Michael, where she'd planned to live out her days surrounded by the artifacts of a life well lived. I like them, she said simply. Of course you do. Ashley's tone suggested this was part of the problem. It's just that sometimes we get so attached to old things that we can't see when it's time to let go. The comment landed like a physical blow. Lydia understood perfectly well that Ashley wasn't talking about curtains. She reached for the gravy boat to refill it, her movements made clumsy by the subtle tremor that worsened when she was upset. The boat slipped from her fingers, sending rich brown gravy cascading across the white tablecloth and directly onto Ashley's cream-colored designer purse. The silence that followed was deafening. Oh no, Lydia breathed, reaching for her napkin. Ashley, I'm so sorry. That's it. Ashley shot to her feet, holding her purse away from her body like something contaminated. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Clumsy. Forgetful. This bag costs $600, Mom. $600. I'll pay for cleaning. Cleaning? Ashley's voice rose. You can't clean luxury leather that's been soaked in grease. This is ruined. Completely ruined. Michael finally looked up from his phone, taking in the scene, his wife's fury, his mother's stricken face, the growing stain on the tablecloth. Lydia watched something shift in his expression, saw the moment he made his choice. Mom, he said, his voice carrying a finality that made her stomach drop. This can't keep happening. It was an accident. This whole thing is an accident waiting to happen. He gestured around the room, his movement taking in the gravy stain, the careful table setting, her entire life. Look at this place. Look at you. When's the last time you had your eyes checked? Your reflexes tested? Ashley nodded vigorously. We've been talking about this for months. You're not 20 anymore. You're not even 60 anymore. You're 72 years old, and you're living alone in a house that's too big for you, cooking meals that are too complicated. I've been cooking Sunday dinner for this family for 20 years, Lydia said quietly. And maybe it's time to stop, Michael replied. Maybe it's time to accept that that things have changed, that you've become. He paused, struggling with the words. Lydia could see Ashley's influence in his hesitation, her coaching in the careful way he chose his phrasing. You're just a burden now, Mom. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Madison gasped. Their son looked up from his phone for the first time all evening, his eyes wide. Even Ashley seemed startled by the bluntness of it, but Michael pressed on, as if the words, once started, had to be finished. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but someone has to. You need more help than we can give you. Professional help. There are facilities, nice places, where people can take proper care of you. Facilities, Lydia repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Assisted living, Ashley clarified, her tone suddenly gentle, as if kindness could soften the blow they'd just delivered. There are lovely places around here. You'd have your own apartment, but with help when you need it. Meals prepared for you, activities. People your own age. People my own age, Lydia echoed. Madison stood abruptly. tears streaming down her face. "This is horrible. Both of you are horrible." She looked at her grandmother, her young face crumpled with anguish. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Madison, sit down," Ashley snapped. "This is an adult conversation." "No, it's not," Madison shot back. "It's cruel. Grandma's not a burden. She's family." Michael's face flushed red. "Don't talk to your mother that way. You don't understand. I understand that you're abandoning Grandma because Mom doesn't want to deal with her anymore." The accusation hung in the air, too close to the truth for comfort. Ashley's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "We're leaving," Michael announced, standing and pulling out his wallet. He threw two $20 bills on the stained tablecloth. "For the dry cleaning." "Michael," Lydia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. We can talk about this." But he was already moving, gathering his family like a general organizing a retreat. Ashley clutched her ruined purse, shooting wounded looks at the gravy stain as if it were evidence of assault. Their son followed numbly, still processing what he'd witnessed. Madison looked back over her shoulder, her face streaked with tears. "I love you, Grandma," she called out, her voice breaking. And then they were gone, the front door slamming with a finality that seemed to shake the entire house. Lydia stood in her dining room, surrounded by the elaborate meal she'd spent all morning preparing, staring at the $20 bills that somehow made the whole thing worse. The silence was crushing. The ticking of the mantel clock, Robert's grandmother's clock, the one that had counted the minutes of her married life, her widowhood, her years of single motherhood, seemed unnaturally loud. She looked at the table set for 5, now abandoned except for herself, and felt something break inside her chest. She began to clear the table mechanically, her movements slow and deliberate. The pot roast went into containers for the refrigerator, though she knew she'd never finish it alone. The Yorkshire pudding, already beginning to collapse, followed. Each dish represented hours of preparation, decades of tradition, now reduced to leftovers that would spoil before she could eat them. It wasn't until she was loading the dishwasher that she noticed Michael's phone on the counter, forgotten in his haste to escape. She picked it up, intending to call him, when the screen lit up with a text notification. "Sunset Manor has an opening in their memory care unit. Should I schedule a tour?" "Ashley!" Lydia's hands began to shake as she scrolled through the conversation thread. Weeks of messages, research, price comparisons. Ashley had been planning this for months, gathering ammunition for today's confrontation. "Mom's getting worse. The confusion is more obvious now." "Ashley?" "I know. But she'll fight us on this. Michael? Let her. She can't live alone much longer anyway. It's not safe." "Ashley? What if she refuses?" "Michael. Then we make the decision for her. Medical necessity. We can probably get power of attorney if we document the incidents." "Ashley." Lydia sank into a kitchen chair, the phone trembling in her hands. Incidents. They'd been cataloging her mistakes, building a case against her competency. The spilled gravy wasn't an accident. It was evidence. The dry roast wasn't a minor cooking error. It was proof of decline. She thought of the love she'd poured into this house, this family. The nights she'd stayed up with infant Michael, walking the floors when he had colic. The way she'd worked double shifts at the school to afford his college tuition after Robert died. The business loan she'd co-signed when Michael wanted to start his construction company, using her house as collateral. "You're just a burden now." The words echoed in the empty kitchen, bouncing off walls that had once held so much laughter. She looked around at the home she'd built, the life she'd created, and realized that to her son, her only child, the boy she'd raised alone, the man she'd sacrificed everything for, she had become nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Outside, the Illinois autumn was painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors she'd taught him to identify when he was 4 years old, and everything was still possible. Now those trees seemed to be burning, and she was alone in a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The phone buzzed again in her hands. Another message from Ashley. How did it go? Did she take it well? Lydia stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to respond, to defend herself, to fight back against this cold calculation of her worth. But a larger part, the part that had been growing stronger through months of subtle slights and careful manipulations, simply felt tired. She set the phone on the counter and walked to the window overlooking her garden. The roses she'd planted when Michael graduated high school were still blooming, defiant against the coming frost. She'd tended this garden for 30 years, through seasons of growth and dormancy, always believing that love and patience would eventually bear fruit. Perhaps it was time to accept that some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Some words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. And some relationships, no matter how much love had gone into building them, could be destroyed by the simple expedient of calling them a burden. But as she stood there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the detritus of her shattered Sunday tradition, Lydia Hoffman made a decision that would have surprised her son. She wasn't going to fight for a relationship where she wasn't wanted. She wasn't going to beg for love from people who saw her as an obligation. She was going to survive this. And perhaps, in surviving, she might discover that she was worth more than she'd allowed herself to believe. The phone buzzed once more on the counter, but Lydia didn't turn around. Whatever message awaited her could wait. Right now, she had a life to rebuild, one that didn't depend on the approval of people who had already written her off as yesterday's burden. Michael's phone still lay on Lydia's kitchen counter 3 days later, its black screen reflecting the morning light that struggled through unwashed windows. She hadn't moved it, hadn't called him, hadn't done much of anything except exist in the hollow space that used to be her life. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Robert's pride and joy, chimed 8 times, marking another morning she'd spent in her nightgown. The blue flannel had become her uniform of defeat, soft and shapeless like the woman wearing it. She'd stopped brushing her hair on Monday, stopped answering the phone on Tuesday. By Wednesday, she'd stopped pretending that getting dressed mattered when there was nowhere to go and no one who cared whether she showed up. The house felt different now, as if Michael's words had changed its very architecture. Rooms that had once hummed with purpose. The kitchen where she'd packed thousands of school lunches. The living room where she'd graded papers by lamplight. The dining room where Sunday dinners had created a weekly rhythm of family connection, now felt like museum exhibits of a life that no longer existed. "You're just a burden now." The words followed her from room to room, echoing in spaces that had once been filled with laughter. She found herself avoiding the dining room entirely, unwilling to face the table where her worth had been so efficiently calculated and found wanting. The phone had rung 17 times since Sunday. She knew because she'd counted, each shrill demand for attention feeling like an assault on her fragile peace. Pastor Thompson had called twice. The church secretary once. Her neighbor Carol Jenkins had called 6 times, each message growing more concerned than the last. "Lydia, honey, I haven't seen you on our morning walk. Just checking in. Lydia, it's Carol again. I saw your newspaper is still on the porch. Call me back. Okay, now I'm worried. If you don't answer this phone, I'm coming over there." But Lydia had unplugged the machine after that, unable to bear the kindness in Carol's voice. Kindness felt dangerous now, like a luxury she could no longer afford. Better to exist in this gray space between sleeping and waking, where expectations couldn't find her and disappointment couldn't touch what was already broken. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the morning paper without reading it, when she heard the sharp rap of knuckles against her front door. 3 authoritative knocks that brooked no argument. "Lydia Marie Hoffman, I know you're in there. Open this door right now, or I'm using the spare key you gave me for emergencies." Carol's voice carried the no-nonsense authority of a woman who'd raised 4 children and buried 1 husband. At 68, she was 4 years younger than Lydia, but had always possessed the kind of confident determination that Lydia secretly envied. "I'm fine," Lydia called weakly through the door. "Fine, my foot. People who are fine don't ignore their friends for 3 days." The sound of keys jingling followed. I'm coming in, Lydia. You can meet me in the living room, or I can find you wherever you're hiding, but we're gonna talk. The front door opened with a decisive click, followed by the sound of Carol's sensible shoes on hardwood floors. Lydia heard her moving through the house. The living room first, then the dining room, where she probably noticed the lingering scent of failure that seemed to permeate everything now. Kitchen, Carol announced, her voice getting closer. Should have known. Lydia looked up to see her neighbor framed in the doorway, a vision of purposeful energy in her neat khaki pants and cardigan. Carol carried a covered casserole dish in one hand and wore the expression of someone prepared for battle. Good Lord, Lydia, when's the last time you combed your hair? I don't see how that's any of your business, Lydia replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Carol set the dish on the counter and turned to study her friend with the clinical assessment of someone who'd spent years evaluating the needs of others. 3 days. That's how long you've been wallowing. I figure that's about the right amount of time to feel sorry for yourself before it becomes a habit. Feel sorry for myself? Lydia's laugh was bitter. Is that what you think this is? I think you've had something terrible happen, and instead of talking about it, you're sitting here in your nightgown trying to disappear. Carol pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. So let's talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. Really? Because Sunday night, Ashley Hoffman called me looking for her daughter. Said Madison had run off somewhere after, quote, a little family disagreement. Took me about 5 minutes to figure out that little disagreement was code for something a lot uglier. Lydia's hands tightened around her coffee mug, the same mug she'd been nursing for hours, its contents long since cold. Madison was here? For about 20 minutes, crying her eyes out. I saw her waiting at the bus stop afterward, looking like her world had ended. Carol's voice softened. What did they do to you, honey? The gentleness in the question was Lydia's undoing. The careful composure she'd been maintaining, the dignity she'd wrapped around herself like armor, cracked wide open. The sob that escaped her throat sounded foreign, like a sound made by someone else entirely. He said I was a burden, she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. Michael said I was just a burden now. Carol's face went very still. In the 15 years they'd known each other, Lydia had never seen her friend look quite so dangerous. That boy said what? Ashley's been planning it for months. I saw the texts on his phone. They want to put me in a facility. Memory care, Carol. They think I'm losing my mind. Are you? The blunt question startled Lydia into looking up. Carol's expression was serious but not unkind. I don't think so. I mean, I forget things sometimes. Everyone our age forgets things. I spilled gravy on Ashley's purse, and suddenly that's evidence that I can't take care of myself. Did you tell them about Robert's life insurance money? No, Lydia shook her head. They don't know about that. Carol leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. So they're planning to warehouse you somewhere while assuming you're broke and helpless. It doesn't matter what I have. I'm still a burden to them. Honey, listen to me very carefully. Carol reached across the table and covered Lydia's hands with her own. Being inconvenient to selfish people doesn't make you a burden. It makes them selfish. The words hit Lydia like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they offered a perspective she hadn't considered. But I am getting older. I do forget things sometimes. Maybe I am too much trouble. Stop. Carol's voice cut through the self-doubt like a blade. Just stop. Do you know what my daughter-in-law said to me last year when I asked if I could move closer to them? She said it would be too much drama to have me nearby. Too much drama. As if being family was some kind of performance I was putting on for attention. Lydia blinked in surprise. Carol had never mentioned this before. So you know what I did? I stopped asking for their approval. I moved to Peoria anyway, bought the house next to yours, and started building a life that didn't require their permission. Carol's smile was fierce. Best decision I ever made. Instead of feeling like a burden to people who didn't want me around, I found people who did. But it's different with Michael. He's my son, my only child. And that gives him the right to treat you like garbage? Honey, being someone's mother doesn't mean you have to accept being their doormat. The casserole dish seemed to mock them from the counter, another gesture of care that Lydia felt too broken to deserve. I don't know how to do this, Carol. I don't know how to be angry at him. I've spent his whole life making excuses for him, protecting him, putting him first. I don't know who I am if I'm not Michael's mother. Then maybe it's time to find out. Carol stood and moved to the stove, turning on the burner under the kettle. But first, you're going to shower and put on real clothes. Then we're going to eat some of my chicken and dumplings. And then we're going to figure out what Lydia Hoffman wants her life to look like. I don't want anything. That's the problem. That's grief talking, not truth. You've been grieving the loss of a relationship that probably died a long time ago. The Michael who loved and respected you? He's been gone for years. What you've been holding on to is the memory of who he used to be. The kettle began to whistle, its sharp cry filling the kitchen. Carol moved with practiced efficiency, preparing tea with the kind of automatic care that spoke of years spent tending to others. When Harold died, Carol continued, her voice gentle, I spent months trying to keep his routines alive. I set the table for two, made his coffee every morning, kept his favorite foods in the house. It wasn't until my youngest daughter sat me down and told me I was living with a ghost that I realized I wasn't honoring his memory. I was avoiding my own life. She set a steaming mug in front of Lydia, the gesture simple but weighted with meaning. Michael may have delivered the killing blow on Sunday, but this relationship has been dying for a long time. You've just been too afraid to let it go. Lydia wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, feeling heat seep into fingers that had been cold for days. What if he never calls? What if this is really it? Then you'll know where you stand. And honey, that's better than spending the rest of your life wondering when the next rejection is coming. The truth of it settled into Lydia's chest like a weight. She had been living in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for the next criticism, the next subtle put-down, the next sign that her presence was merely tolerated rather than welcomed. I used to call him every Sunday night after they left, she admitted. To thank him for coming, to apologize if anything had gone wrong, to make sure he wasn't upset with me. And how did those conversations usually go? Lydia thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. Short. He was always busy, always had somewhere else to be. I'd end up feeling like I was bothering him, even when I was thanking him. So you've been apologizing for existing in your own son's life. The observation hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Lydia realized that somewhere along the way, she'd become a supplicant in her own family, constantly seeking permission to matter. What kind of mother does that make me? She whispered. The kind who loves too much and asks for too little in return. Carol's voice was firm but kind. And it's time to stop. For the first time in 3 days, Lydia felt something stir inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more sustainable. A small spark of anger that burned clean and bright. I'm not going to call him, she said, the words surprising her with their firmness. Good. I'm not going to apologize for what happened Sunday. Even better, I'm not going to beg for scraps of affection from people who've already decided I don't matter. Carol's smile was radiant. Now you're talking like the woman who taught high school for 40 years. That woman didn't take any nonsense from anyone. Lydia stood on unsteady legs, suddenly aware of how long she'd been sitting, how long she'd been still. I should shower. Yes, you should. And while you do that, I'm going to heat up this casserole and make us a proper lunch. Then we're going to sit down and figure out what comes next. As Lydia climbed the stairs to her bathroom, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was disheveled and worn, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. A glimmer of the person she used to be before she'd learned to make herself smaller for other people's comfort. The hot water felt like baptism, washing away 3 days of defeat and something deeper. Years of diminishing herself, of accepting less than she deserved, of believing that love meant never expecting anything in return. As she stood under the spray, Lydia made a decision that would have shocked the woman she'd been a week ago. She wasn't going to wait for Michael to call. She wasn't going to pine for his approval or beg for his forgiveness. She was going to live her life as if it mattered. Because it did. And if her son couldn't see that, it said more about him than it did about her. The phone Michael had left behind could stay on her counter forever for all she cared. She had better things to do than wait for someone who'd already decided she wasn't worth his time. She had a life to reclaim. The morning light streaming through Lydia's kitchen window caught the dust motes dancing in air that felt lighter somehow, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for weeks. 2 months had passed since that devastating Sunday dinner, and the woman sitting at the breakfast table bore little resemblance to the broken person Carol had found in her nightgown. Lydia's silver hair was neatly styled in a shorter cut that framed her face with unexpected elegance. She wore a soft lavender sweater, new, purchased during a shopping trip with Carol that had felt like an act of rebellion, and her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the agenda for today's book club meeting. The Midnight Library lay open beside her coffee cup, its pages marked with sticky notes in her careful teacher's handwriting. The protagonist's journey through infinite possibilities had resonated more deeply than she'd expected, each alternative life a reminder that her own story wasn't finished yet. The Peoria Women's Book Club had been Carol's idea, presented with characteristic directness 3 weeks after the confrontation. "You need people," Carol had announced. "Real people who see you as Lydia, not just someone's mother or grandmother." Lydia had resisted at first, the prospect of meeting new people feeling as daunting as scaling a mountain. But Carol had literally driven her to the first meeting, refusing to accept no for an answer. Now, 8 weeks later, Lydia found herself looking forward to Thursday mornings, with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The women in the group: Martha, the retired librarian with her encyclopedic knowledge of literature; Susan, the divorced accountant, who brought homemade scones and sharp observations about human nature; Patricia, the former nurse whose blunt humor could make even the darkest novels seem manageable, had welcomed her without question or judgment. They discussed books with the passion of people who understood that stories mattered, that literature could illuminate truths about living that casual conversation often missed. More importantly, they treated her like someone whose opinions mattered, whose insights were valuable, whose presence added something to their gatherings rather than detracted from them. Lydia glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m., which meant she had an hour before her volunteer shift at the community food bank. That commitment had grown from a tentative inquiry to Pastor Thompson into a twice-weekly routine that filled her mornings with purpose. Working alongside others to sort donations and pack boxes for struggling families had reminded her that need took many forms, and that her ability to help others wasn't diminished by her age. If anything, her years of teaching had prepared her perfectly for the work. She could organize supplies with the same efficiency she'd once brought to classroom management, and her patience with the families who came seeking help drew from the same well of empathy that had made her beloved by generations of students. The sound of footsteps on her front porch drew her attention to the window, where she saw Pastor Thompson approaching with his measured gait and gentle smile. He'd taken to stopping by occasionally, never intrusively, always with some small pretext that allowed her to maintain her dignity while ensuring she wasn't isolating herself. "Morning, Lydia," he called through the screen door. "Hope I'm not interrupting your breakfast." "Not at all, Pastor Thompson. Come in, please. I was just reviewing today's book discussion questions." He entered with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd been part of her life for decades, accepting her offer of coffee with genuine appreciation. William Thompson had officiated at her wedding to Robert 35 years ago, had delivered the eulogy at Robert's funeral, had baptized Michael and watched him grow from an eager child in Sunday school to whatever he'd become. "How are you settling into your new routines?" he asked. Settling into the chair Carol had occupied during that pivotal conversation 2 months ago. "Better than I expected," Lydia admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "I didn't realize how narrow my world had become until I started expanding it again." Pastor Thompson nodded thoughtfully. It's remarkable how we can gradually shrink our lives without noticing, isn't it? Each small compromise feels reasonable until we look up and discover we've given away pieces of ourselves we never meant to lose. His words carried a weight that suggested personal experience, and Lydia found herself studying his face with new attention. She'd known William Thompson for decades, but mostly in his professional capacity. The man behind the collar remained something of a mystery. "You speak as if you've experienced that yourself," she observed. A shadow passed across his features. "My first marriage failed because I thought loving someone meant accommodating their every demand, even when those demands required me to become someone I wasn't. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to realize I'd already lost everything I actually needed." The confession hung in the air between them, intimate and unexpected. Lydia had known he'd been married before his current wife, but the details had always remained private. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Don't be. That failure taught me the difference between love that builds people up and love that tears them down. Between sacrifice that comes from strength and sacrifice that comes from fear." He met her eyes directly. "I've been watching you these past months, Lydia. The change is in you. And I have to say, you seem more like yourself than you have in years." The observation startled her. "More like myself?" The woman who could command a classroom of 30 energetic children. The woman who raised a son largely on her own while working full-time. The woman who never backed down from a parent who tried to bully her into changing a grade she knew was fair. His smile was warm. That woman got lost somewhere along the way. "I'm glad to see her finding her way back." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For so long she'd measured herself against other people's expectations, other people's needs, other people's convenience. To be seen and recognized for who she actually was felt like a gift she'd forgotten she deserved. "Michael called the church yesterday," Pastor Thompson said quietly. The words hit Lydia like cold water, washing away the warmth of the moment. Her hands tightened around her coffee mug. "Oh. He wanted to know if I'd spoken with you. If you were in your right mind," was how he put it. The clinical phrase stung more than open cruelty would have. To be discussed as if she were a problem to be managed rather than a person with feelings and agency felt like a violation of something fundamental. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that you seemed to be thriving, that you were more engaged with community activities than you'd been in months, that your mind appeared as sharp as ever." Pastor Thompson's voice carried a thread of steel. "And I told him that if he had concerns about your well-being, perhaps he should address them with you directly, rather than investigating you through intermediaries." Despite everything, Lydia felt a flicker of hope. "How did he respond to that?" "He didn't like it much, asked if I thought you might be making poor decisions, suggested that your recent behavior was concerning." "Recent behavior?" Lydia's voice rose despite her effort to remain calm. "You mean living my life without asking his permission? I believe that's exactly what he means." Pastor Thompson leaned forward slightly. "Lydia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Are you avoiding Michael because you're angry, or because you're afraid?" The question caught her off guard. She started to give the easy answer, that she was simply respecting his obvious desire for distance, but something in Pastor Thompson's expression demanded deeper truth. "Both," she admitted finally. "I'm angry that he could dismiss 40 years of love and sacrifice so easily. But I'm also afraid that if I reach out, he'll just hurt me again. And I'm not sure I can survive it a second time. That's a reasonable fear. But it's also a prison of your own making." The words stung because they carried truth. "So what are you suggesting? That I call him and pretend nothing happened?" "I'm suggesting that you consider what you want your relationship with your son to look like, assuming you want one at all. And then decide whether that goal is worth the risk of making the first move." "Why should I have to make the first move? He's the one who said I was a burden." "Because you're the one who's done the work to change. You're the one who's built a life that doesn't depend on his approval. You're the one with the strength to extend grace if you choose to." Pastor Thompson's words felt like a challenge, but not an unkind one. Lydia considered them as she watched a construction crew working across the street, their orange vests bright against the autumn morning. The work looked difficult, tearing up old pavement to lay new foundation, but necessary. "I saw his crew working on the Henderson project last week," she said, nodding toward the workers. "The one that's been in the news." Pastor Thompson followed her gaze. "Yes, I heard there were some complications with that build. More than complications, from what I understand. There are rumors about structural problems, potential lawsuits." Lydia spoke carefully, not wanting to spread gossip, but unable to ignore what she'd observed. "Michael looked stressed when I saw him at the site." "Success built on cutting corners rarely lasts," Pastor Thompson observed. Michael always was more concerned with appearances than foundations. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crew work with the methodical patience that real construction required. "I received something yesterday that I think you should see," Lydia said finally, rising to retrieve an envelope from the kitchen counter. "A birthday card from Madison." She handed him the card, a simple design with flowers on the front, but the message inside was written in Madison's careful handwriting. "Dear Grandma, I miss you every day. I know Mom and Dad don't want me to contact you, but you're still my grandmother and I still love you. I hope you're okay. I hope you know that what they said wasn't true. Love always, Madison. P.S. I'm applying to the education program at Bradley University because I want to be a teacher like you." Pastor Thompson read the card twice, his expression growing more thoughtful with each pass. "This changes things, does it? A 16-year-old girl is caught in the middle of an adult conflict she didn't create and can't resolve. She's reaching out because she understands something her parents have forgotten, that love doesn't require permission from other people." Lydia felt her chest tighten. "I can't use Madison to get back at Michael. I'm not suggesting you do. I'm suggesting that Madison needs her grandmother, regardless of what her parents think they need." He handed the card back to her. "The question is whether you're going to let Michael's poor choices cost you a relationship with your granddaughter." The weight of that possibility settled over Lydia like a physical presence. Madison had always been the light in family gatherings, the bridge between generations, the reminder of why family mattered in the first place. To lose that connection, to allow it to be severed by adult pride and stubbornness, felt like a betrayal of everything she'd tried to teach about love and loyalty. "I don't know how to navigate this," she admitted. "The same way you've navigated everything else these past 2 months. One day at a time, with courage and integrity, trusting that doing the right thing will lead to the right outcome." Pastor Thompson rose to leave, but paused at the door. "Lydia, can I share something my grandmother used to tell me?" She nodded. "She said that the difference between a garden and a weed patch isn't the quality of the soil or the amount of rain. It's the gardener's willingness to tend what deserves to grow and remove what doesn't." His smile was gentle but pointed. "You've been working on your garden these past months. Don't let someone else's weeds choke out what you're trying to grow." After he left, Lydia sat at her kitchen table with Madison's card in her hands, reading and rereading the words that seemed to glow with hope and possibility. Her granddaughter wanted to be a teacher, wanted to follow in her footsteps, wanted to maintain a connection that transcended the adult conflicts swirling around them. Perhaps it was time to stop thinking about what Michael wanted or didn't want, what Ashley approved or disapproved of, what consequences might follow from her choices. Perhaps it was time to focus on what she wanted, what she valued, what kind of legacy she hoped to leave. She reached for her phone, not Michael's abandoned device, which still sat on the counter like an accusation, but her own phone that had become an instrument of connection rather than anxiety over the past months. She had a book club meeting to attend, where intelligent women would discuss stories that mattered. She had a volunteer shift at the food bank, where her efforts would feed families who needed help. She had a hair appointment this afternoon, because Carol had convinced her that looking good was a form of self-respect. And tonight, she would sit down and write a letter to her granddaughter, not a text or an email that could be intercepted or monitored, but a real letter that Madison could keep and treasure. A letter that said love doesn't require permission, that family connections can survive adult failures, and that dreams of teaching were worth pursuing regardless of what anyone else thought. For the first time in months, Lydia Hoffman felt like she was exactly where she belonged, in her own life, making her own choices, building relationships that honored her worth rather than questioning it. The foundation she was laying now was solid, built on truth and self-respect, rather than fear and accommodation. Whatever storms might come, she would weather them from a position of strength rather than surrender. And that felt like victory enough for now. The manila envelope lay on Michael Hoffman's desk like an accusation, its legal letterhead stark against the chaos of blueprints and invoices that had become his daily reality. He'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, knowing that opening it would make everything real in a way he wasn't prepared to face. Outside his trailer office, the Henderson project site buzzed with the controlled urgency of a construction crew racing against time and mounting problems. The sound of jackhammers echoed off the half-finished office building, each percussion a reminder of the structural issues that had turned his most prestigious contract into a potential disaster. Michael's hands shook slightly as he finally tore open the envelope. The words seemed to leap off the page. Notice of intent to file lawsuit, structural deficiencies, breach of contract, damages exceeding $2. $3 million. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he took a sip anyway, needing something to do with his hands while his mind processed the magnitude of what he was reading. Henderson and Associates wasn't just threatening to sue, they were demanding immediate remediation of the foundation problems, return of all payments made, and additional damages for delays and lost business opportunities. "Shit," he whispered, the word hanging in the stale air of the trailer. "Shit, shit, shit." His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Dinner with the Carmichaels tonight. Don't forget. And wear the blue tie. You need to look successful." The irony was almost laughable. Successful. He was 3 weeks away from losing everything he'd built over 15 years, and his wife was worried about which tie he wore to dinner with their country club friends. The trailer door swung open without warning, bringing Jake Miller's familiar bulk and the scent of concrete dust. Michael's business partner moved with the deliberate efficiency of a man who'd spent 30 years in construction, his weathered face reading the situation in a single glance. "That bad?" Jake asked, nodding toward the legal papers scattered across the desk. "Worse than bad. They want everything. The whole payment, remediation costs, damages for their lost tenants." Michael's voice cracked on the last word. "Jake, this could bankrupt us." Jake settled into the folding chair across from Michael's desk, his expression grim but not surprised. "I've been doing some calculations. Between the foundation repair, the legal fees, and the potential judgment, we're looking at needing close to $500,000. Maybe more. Money we don't have. Money we're not even close to having." Jake pulled out his own folder, filled with financial projections that painted an increasingly desperate picture. "I've been on the phone with every sub we use, trying to negotiate payment delays. Most of them are willing to work with us, but the concrete supplier is demanding payment within 30 days, or they're filing liens." Michael buried his face in his hands, feeling the weight of 15 years of work crumbling around him. The Henderson project was supposed to be their breakthrough, the kind of high-profile commercial job that would establish Hoffman Construction as a major player in the Peoria market. Instead, it had become a sinkhole that threatened to swallow everything they'd built. "How did this happen?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "You know how it happened. We bid too low to get the job, then cut corners on materials and inspection to maintain our margin. The foundation work should have been steel-reinforced concrete, but we went with standard concrete and hoped the building inspector wouldn't notice." The accusation hung between them, unspoken but understood. It had been Michael's decision to cut corners. Michael's insistence that they could make the numbers work. Michael's pride that had refused to walk away from a contract that was flawed from the beginning. "What about insurance?" Jake's laugh was bitter. "Read your policy lately? Structural failures due to inadequate construction aren't covered. Neither are foundation problems that result from deviating from approved plans." Michael's phone rang, the caller ID showing Ashley's contact photo, a glamorous shot from their vacation in Cabo last year. back when he'd still believed success was just a matter of wanting it badly enough. "Hey babe," he answered, trying to inject normalcy into his voice. "Michael, I just got off the phone with Sarah Carmichael. She mentioned that her husband heard some concerning rumors about the Henderson project. Please tell me there's nothing to worry about." The concern in Ashley's voice wasn't for him, he realized. It was for their reputation, their social standing, their carefully constructed image of prosperity. "Everything's fine," he lied, watching Jake's eyebrows rise at the obvious deception. "Just some minor construction delays, nothing we can't handle." "Good, because I already told her we'd be happy to bid on their new house addition. This could be exactly the kind of high-end residential work that takes us to the next level." Michael closed his eyes, unable to find the words to explain that there might not be a next level, that they were currently fighting to survive this level. "I have to go, Ash. We'll talk tonight. Don't forget the blue tie, and Michael, maybe we should think about upgrading your truck. The Carmichaels noticed you driving that old Ford last week. Image matters in this business." After she hung up, Michael stared at his phone, wondering when his wife had become someone he couldn't tell the truth to. When had their marriage become a performance where his role was to provide the lifestyle she'd decided they deserved? "She doesn't know," Jake observed. It wasn't a question. "How do I tell her? How do I explain that everything she thinks we are is built on credit and wishful thinking?" Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Michael, can I ask you something? When's the last time you talked to your mother?" The question came from nowhere, hitting Michael like a physical blow. What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. "I don't know. 2 months ago, maybe?" "Why?" "Because Lydia Hoffman might be the only person in your life who would help you through this without judging you for it." Michael's laugh was harsh. "Are you serious? My mother?" "Jake, you weren't there that last Sunday. The things that were said. I heard about it. Half the congregation heard about it, thanks to Ashley's version of events." Jake's tone carried a warning. "But I also know your mother, Michael. I've known her since you and I started this business. She co-signed our first equipment loan when no bank would touch us." The memory hit Michael unexpectedly. Lydia, sitting in the bank president's office in her best dress, quietly reviewing loan documents while he and Jake fidgeted like schoolboys. She'd asked careful questions about interest rates and repayment terms, then signed her name with the steady confidence of someone who believed in her son's dreams. "That was different," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Was it? Or are you just too proud to admit you might need help from someone you've been treating badly?" "I haven't been treating her badly. I've been trying to set appropriate boundaries." Jake's stare could have melted steel. "Boundaries? Is that what Ashley calls it?" The accusation hung in the air between them, impossible to deny because it was fundamentally true. Every boundary Michael had established with his mother had originated from Ashley's subtle suggestions, her careful observations about how Lydia's presence affected their family dynamics. "You don't understand the situation at home," Michael said weakly. "I understand that you've got a wife who's more concerned about what tie you wear than whether your business survives, and a mother who would probably mortgage her house to help you if you asked." Jake stood, his patience finally exhausted. "I also understand that pride is a luxury we can't afford right now." After Jake left, Michael sat alone in the trailer, surrounded by the evidence of his mounting failures. The Henderson project timeline mocked him from the wall. Every milestone marked in optimistic red ink, every deadline now impossible to meet. The financial projections he'd presented to the bank 6 months ago read like fiction, their confident predictions bearing no resemblance to his current reality. His phone buzzed with another text from Ashley. "Picked up your dry cleaning. The blue shirt goes better with the tie. See you at 7. She was living in the same world she'd always inhabited, where problems could be solved with the right outfit and the right connections. The idea of telling her the truth, that they might lose the house, the cars, everything they'd built their identity around, felt impossible. But Jake's words echoed in his mind. "Lydia Hoffman might be the only person in your life who would help you through this without judging you for it." The thought of approaching his mother after what had happened that Sunday made his stomach clench with something that might have been shame. He could still see her face when he'd called her a burden, the way something had died in her eyes in that moment. The hurt had been so profound that even Ashley had seemed shaken by it. But desperation had a way of clarifying priorities, and Michael was beginning to understand that his pride was about to cost him everything that actually mattered. His desk drawer held business cards from 3 bankruptcy attorneys he'd consulted quietly over the past week. Each conversation had painted the same grim picture: complete liquidation, personal guarantees called in, his credit destroyed for years to come. The American dream reduced to a cautionary tale about ambition exceeding ability. Unless he could find $500,000 somewhere. The number felt astronomical, impossible, a sum that existed only in the abstract world of bank loans and legal settlements. But as he sat in the growing darkness of his trailer office, listening to the sounds of a construction site winding down for another day, Michael began to wonder if the impossible might be hiding in plain sight. His mother had always been frugal, careful with money in the way of people who'd lived through genuine hardship. She'd worked for 40 years, saved diligently, lived simply. There had been life insurance when his father died, though Michael had never asked about the specifics. It wasn't the kind of conversation sons typically had with their mothers. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Michael Hoffman was rapidly running out of both time and options. The first step would be swallowing his pride enough to make a phone call. The second would be finding the words to undo 2 months of silence and years of growing distance. The third would be learning whether the woman he'd dismissed as a burden was still the mother who had once believed in him enough to risk everything on his dreams. As he gathered the legal papers and prepared to face another evening of pretending everything was fine, Michael realized he was about to discover whether love could survive the kind of betrayal he'd inflicted, and whether forgiveness was something that could be asked for or only earned. The foundation of his business was crumbling, but perhaps it was time to find out if the foundation of his family was stronger than his worst mistakes. Madison Hoffman clutched her bus pass in sweaty palms as the city transit lurched to a stop 3 blocks from her grandmother's house. The October afternoon had turned crisp, and she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, not from cold, but from the nervous energy that had been building since she'd made this decision during third-period chemistry. She'd been staring at the periodic table, thinking about atomic bonds and how some elements naturally attracted while others repelled, when it occurred to her that families might work the same way. For the past 2 months, her parents had been acting like her grandmother was some kind of toxic element that needed to be contained. But Madison remembered a different version of Lydia Hoffman, the woman who had taught her to braid friendship bracelets, who still sent birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, who listened to Madison's dreams of becoming a teacher with the same serious attention other adults reserved for practical career choices. The walk to Maple Street felt both endless and too short. With each step, Madison rehearsed what she would say, how she would explain her presence without making things worse for anyone. She wasn't supposed to be here. That much had been made crystal clear during the weeks of tense conversations and closed-door arguments that had followed the incident, as her parents referred to it. But 16 years old felt too young to accept that love could simply end because adults had said ugly things to each other. The house looked different somehow, though Madison couldn't immediately identify what had changed. The lawn was still neatly maintained, the flower beds still carefully tended despite the approaching winter. Maybe it was just that she'd never approached it as a forbidden destination before, never had to worry about being seen climbing the front steps. She pressed the doorbell and heard the familiar chime echo through rooms that had once felt like a second home. Footsteps approached, lighter than she remembered, quicker, and then the door swung open to reveal her grandmother. Madison blinked in surprise. Lydia looked different, younger somehow. Her hair was shorter and more stylish, framing her face in a way that emphasized her still bright eyes. She wore a soft purple sweater that Madison had never seen before, and there was something in her expression, a confidence maybe, that seemed new. "Madison?" Lydia's voice carried shock, joy, and concern in equal measure. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" "I missed you," Madison said simply, and then she was crying, the careful composure she'd maintained for weeks crumbling in the face of her grandmother's familiar warmth. Without hesitation, Lydia pulled her into a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla, like safety and unconditional love. They stood in the doorway for a long moment, grandmother and granddaughter clinging to each other, while the weight of separation and adult foolishness dissolved between them. "Come in, honey. Come in before the neighbors start talking." Lydia guided her inside, closing the door behind them with gentle finality. "Are you supposed to be here? Do your parents know where you are?" Madison shook her head, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. "They think I'm at soccer practice. I brought you something." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a container of chocolate chip cookies, slightly crumbled from the bus ride but still recognizable as homemade. "I made them in cooking class. I used your recipe, the one you taught me when I was 12. Lydia's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the container. "You remembered the recipe. I remember everything you taught me." Madison's voice was fierce with loyalty. "About cooking. About being kind to people even when they're not kind back. About standing up for what's right even when it's hard." They settled in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Madison had learned to crack eggs and measure flour, where conversations about everything from homework troubles to friendship drama had unfolded over countless afternoons. But the dynamic felt different now, charged with the weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid. "How are you, sweetheart? Really?" Lydia poured milk into glasses and arranged the cookies on a plate with the same careful attention she'd always given to Madison's visits. "I'm scared," Madison admitted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "Mom and Dad have been fighting constantly since that Sunday. Not yelling fights, but those quiet, angry ones where they say terrible things in voices that don't carry upstairs." Lydia's hands stilled on the plate. "What kind of things?" "About money, mostly. Dad's business is in trouble. Real trouble, not just the kind where he complains about cash flow. Mom keeps talking about selling the house, moving somewhere cheaper. She's been looking at apartments online when she thinks I can't see." The information hit Lydia like a physical blow. Whatever had happened between her and Michael, whatever hurt feelings and pride had created this chasm, the consequences were rippling outward to affect innocent people. "And there's more," Madison continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard them talking about divorce." "Oh, honey." Lydia reached across the table to take her granddaughter's hands. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this." Quote, "It's not your fault, Grandma. None of this is your fault." Madison's voice carried a maturity that seemed to have aged her years in just a few months. "What Dad said to you that day, it was horrible. And wrong. You're not a burden. You never were." The simple declaration, delivered with teenage certainty, meant more to Lydia than months of self-affirmation and therapy could have provided. To be defended by someone who loved her without agenda or calculation felt like absolution. "Your father is under a lot of pressure," Lydia said carefully, not wanting to criticize Michael even as she struggled to understand his choices. "That's not an excuse for being cruel." Madison's jaw set with stubborn determination. "Mom's been saying things too. About how you're getting difficult as you get older, how you can't really take care of yourself anymore. But that's not true, is it? You seem fine. Better than fine, actually." Lydia smiled, despite the pain Madison's words caused. "I am fine. More than fine, actually. These past months have taught me some things about myself that I'd forgotten." "Like what?" "Like the fact that I'm still capable of making friends, of contributing to my community, of living a full life that doesn't revolve around other people's approval." Lydia paused, choosing her words carefully. "And like the fact that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the consequences of their choices." Madison nodded thoughtfully. "Is that what you're doing with Dad? Stepping back?" "I'm protecting myself, honey. And maybe, indirectly, I'm protecting him too. Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they can climb back up." "How bad is his business situation? Really?" Lydia hesitated. The question touched on information she shouldn't have. Knowledge that had come to her through church gossip and community connections, rather than direct communication with Michael. "What have you heard at home?" "Enough to know it's serious. There's some big lawsuit, and Dad's been staying up all night going through papers and making phone calls." Jake Miller came to the house last week, and I heard him telling Dad that they might lose everything. The picture Madison painted was worse than anything Lydia had imagined. Pride and stubbornness were luxuries that couldn't survive genuine crisis, and it sounded like Michael was facing exactly that kind of emergency. "Grandma," Madison said quietly, "do you have money? I mean, enough to help if you wanted to?" The directness of the question caught Lydia off guard. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I remember when Dad started his business, you helped him then. You were always careful about money, always saving, always planning ahead. And I heard Mom saying once that you probably had more saved than people realized." Lydia studied her granddaughter's face, seeing intelligence and desperation warring in her young features. "Madison, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you could help him. If you could save the business and the house and maybe our family." Madison's voice broke on the last words. "I know what he said was awful. I know he hurt you. But he's still my dad, and I can't stand watching everything fall apart." The plea hung between them, raw and honest in the way only teenage emotion could be. Madison wasn't asking for herself. She was asking for the abstract concept of family, for the idea that love should be stronger than pride, that forgiveness should triumph over justice. "Honey," Lydia said gently, "even if I could help financially, there are other issues here. Trust issues, respect issues. Questions about whether helping someone avoid consequences actually helps them at all. But if the consequence is losing everything, including the chance to ever make things right." Madison's logic was sound, her emotional appeal devastating. Lydia could see the 16-year-old girl struggling with problems that should have been left to adults, trying to solve equations that had no clear solutions. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Both women looked toward the front window, where Ashley's BMW sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. "She tracked my phone," Madison said, her face pale. "I forgot she could do that." The front door burst open without ceremony, bringing Ashley Hoffman's fury and fear in equal measure. She filled the doorway like an avenging angel, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide the raw panic in her eyes. "Madison Elizabeth Hoffman, what do you think you're doing?" Ashley's voice carried the kind of controlled rage that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "I was visiting my grandmother," Madison replied, her chin lifting with defiant courage. "Without permission. Without telling us where you were going. Do you have any idea how worried we were?" Ashley's gaze shifted to Lydia, and her expression hardened further. "And you? How could you let her come here without calling us?" "She just arrived," Lydia said calmly, rising from her chair with the dignity that had carried her through 40 years of difficult parent conferences. "I was about to suggest she call you." "Don't." Ashley's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't pretend you care about our family's well-being. If you cared, you wouldn't have put Madison in this position." "I didn't put her anywhere. She came here because she's hurting, because she's watching her family fall apart and doesn't understand why." "Our family is fine." "No, it's not," Madison interjected, her voice stronger than either woman expected. "Mom, stop lying. Nothing is fine. Dad's business is failing. You're talking about divorce, and you've cut Grandma out of our lives for no good reason." Ashley's composure cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "Madison, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that Dad called Grandma a burden, and now you're all acting like that was okay. I understand that you'd rather lose our house than admit you need help. I understand that you're so worried about what other people think that you can't see what's real anymore." The accusations hit their target with devastating accuracy. Ashley's face cycled through anger, shame, and something that might have been recognition before settling into defensive fury. "Get in the car, Madison. Now." "Mom, please, can't we just talk about this? Can't we figure out a way to—" "Now, Madison." The finality in Ashley's voice brooked no argument. Madison looked between her mother and grandmother, her young face etched with the kind of pain that comes from being forced to choose between loyalties that should never have been in conflict. "I love you, Grandma," she said fiercely, grabbing Lydia in another quick hug. "No matter what anyone says, no matter what happens, I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." "More than you know." Ashley grabbed Madison's arm, propelling her toward the door with barely controlled violence. But at the threshold, she turned back to face Lydia, her expression revealing the full extent of her desperation. "Stay away from our family," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "We don't need your help. We don't need anything from you." After they left, Lydia stood in her empty kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their visit. 2 glasses of milk, half-eaten cookies, the lingering scent of Madison's vanilla perfume. The house felt larger somehow, echoing with the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that remained unspoken. But Madison's words echoed loudest of all. "How bad is his business situation? Really?" For the first time since that devastating Sunday dinner, Lydia found herself thinking not about her own hurt, but about Michael's. About the frightened boy who had once come to her with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that his mother could fix anything that was broken. Some things, she reflected, never really changed. The question was whether she was still the woman who would try to fix them, or whether she had finally learned the difference between helping and enabling. Either way, the decision would have to be made soon. Pride was a luxury that families in crisis couldn't afford, and it sounded like the Hoffman family was running out of time for any luxury at all. The strong box sat on Lydia's bedroom dresser like a judgment, its gray metal surface reflecting the afternoon light that filtered through curtains she'd sewn during the first lonely year of widowhood. She hadn't opened it in over 2 years, not since the anniversary of Robert's death, when she'd briefly considered donating some of his belongings to charity before deciding she wasn't ready to let go. Now 3 hours after Madison's tearful departure and Ashley's furious ultimatum, Lydia found herself staring at the box that contained the financial foundation of her independence. Her hands trembled slightly as she entered the combination, Robert's birthday, though she'd never told anyone that detail, and felt the mechanism click open with mechanical finality. The papers inside were organized with the same meticulous care she'd brought to 40 years of lesson planning. Insurance policies in protective sleeves, bank statements filed chronologically, investment summaries updated quarterly by her financial advisor. But it was the thick envelope marked Life Insurance Settlement Final that drew her attention now, its contents representing a sum that would have seemed impossible during the lean years of single motherhood. $75,000. The number had felt abstract when the check first arrived 5 years ago, compensation for a loss that couldn't be measured in monetary terms. She'd deposited it quietly, telling no one about the windfall, using it to supplement her modest teacher's pension while living essentially the same life she'd always lived. Frugality had become such an ingrained habit that even unexpected wealth couldn't break it. But sitting in her bedroom with Madison's desperate words still echoing in her mind, the money felt suddenly, intensely real. Not just a number in an account, but a tool that could reshape lives, save businesses, preserve families, or enable the very behavior that had caused so much pain in the first place. Lydia spread the financial documents across her bed like tarot cards, each statement telling part of a story she'd never shared. The life insurance money was only part of it. 40 years of careful saving, conservative investments, and the kind of financial discipline that came from growing up during rationing had created a portfolio that would have surprised anyone who knew her as simply the retired teacher living modestly on Maple Street. She thought about Robert, how proud he'd been when he'd finally been able to afford substantial life insurance coverage. "This is for you and Michael," he'd said, signing the papers with the careful penmanship of a man who'd left school after 8th grade to help support his family. "So you'll never have to worry, no matter what happens to me." Robert had worried constantly about money during their marriage, not without reason, given his irregular income as a mechanic and her modest teacher's salary. The idea that his death would provide financial security had been both comfort and bitter irony when cancer took him at 58, just as they'd begun to imagine retirement together. "So you'll never have to worry." But worry, Lydia had discovered, took many forms. She'd worried about making the insurance money last, about maintaining her independence, about becoming a burden to her son. The last worry felt particularly cruel now, given Michael's exact words that devastating Sunday. A knock at her front door interrupted her contemplation. Through the bedroom window, she could see Carol Jenkins on the porch, holding what appeared to be another casserole dish, and wearing the expression of someone who'd arrived for a predetermined intervention. "Coming," Lydia called, quickly gathering the financial documents and returning them to the strongbox. Some conversations required preparation, and Carol's timing suggested this wouldn't be a casual visit. "I saw Ashley's car in your driveway," Carol announced without preamble as Lydia opened the door. "And given the way she peeled out of here 20 minutes ago, I'm guessing it wasn't a social call. Madison came to visit, Ashley came to collect her. And how did that go?" Lydia stepped aside to let Carol enter, noting her friend's shrewd expression. "About as well as you'd expect. Come in. I'll make coffee." But Carol was already moving toward the kitchen, setting her dish on the counter with the efficiency of someone who'd appointed herself chief of emotional support. "Tuna casserole. My grandmother's recipe, and before you say you're fine, I can see from your face that you're not." The observation was accurate enough to be annoying. Lydia had never been good at hiding her emotions, a trait that had served her well as a teacher but poorly in situations requiring diplomatic discretion. "Madison is caught in the middle of something that should never have involved her," Lydia said, measuring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "She came here because she's watching her family fall apart and doesn't understand why adults have to make everything so complicated." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That sometimes love requires difficult choices, and that protecting yourself isn't the same as abandoning someone else." Carol settled into her usual chair at the kitchen table, her gaze sharp and assessing. "But that's not the whole truth, is it?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with the kind of understanding that came from months of honest friendship. Carol had a gift for seeing through polite evasions to the uncomfortable realities beneath, and Lydia had learned that trying to mislead her was both pointless and exhausting. "Madison asked if I had money, enough to help Michael save his business. And do you?" "Yes." The simple admission felt like stepping off a cliff. For 5 years, Lydia had guarded the secret of her financial security, not from shame, but from the certain knowledge that revealing it would change every relationship in her life. People treated you differently when they knew you had resources, some with resentment, others with calculation, most with expectations you couldn't control. "How much?" Carol's question was gentle but persistent. "Enough to save Michael's business and then some." Carol leaned back in her chair, processing this information with the careful consideration of someone who understood both the power and the burden of unexpected wealth. "Does he know?" "No one knows. Except you now." "And you've been sitting on this information while watching your son's life fall apart because—" The question carried no judgment, but it demanded an answer that Lydia wasn't sure she could articulate. Why had she remained silent? Why had she allowed Michael to struggle when she had the means to help? "Because helping him now feels like rewarding him for treating me badly. Because I'm afraid that if I rescue him, he'll never learn to value what he has. Because—" She paused, struggling with the deepest truth. "Because I'm not sure he deserves my help." "Deserve?" Carol repeated the word thoughtfully. "That's a dangerous standard to apply to family." "Is it? What's the point of helping someone who's shown you that your feelings don't matter to them? What kind of message does that send?" Maybe the message that love isn't conditional on good behavior. The observation stung because it echoed everything Lydia had taught about forgiveness and grace during her years of church attendance and Sunday school instruction. But intellectual understanding and emotional reality were proving to be very different things. "I used my first life insurance settlement to help Michael start his business," Lydia said quietly. $25,000. Everything Robert had been able to afford when we were younger. I co-signed loans, mortgaged this house as collateral, worked extra tutoring jobs to help with his cash flow during the early years. And he's forgotten all of that. He's convinced himself that he earned everything through his own effort, that my help was just what mothers are supposed to do, not something that required sacrifice or carried risk." Carol nodded slowly. "So you're worried that helping him again will just reinforce that pattern?" "I'm worried that I'll be enabling the same selfishness that led to him calling me a burden in the first place." The words tasted bitter, but speaking them aloud helped clarify the moral complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, accountability, and the difference between love that built character and love that destroyed it. What did Madison say exactly? About the business situation? Lydia recounted her granddaughter's desperate plea, the picture of mounting crisis that had emerged through teenage observation and overheard conversations. Ashley's panic about losing their house, Michael's sleepless nights wrestling with legal papers, the specter of bankruptcy hanging over everything they'd built. That changes things, Carol said when Lydia finished. Does it? A 16-year-old girl shouldn't have to worry about whether her family will survive financially. Whatever Michael's faults, whatever mistakes he's made, Madison doesn't deserve to pay for them. The point hit home with devastating accuracy. Lydia had been so focused on her relationship with Michael, so hurt by his rejection and Ashley's manipulation, that she'd lost sight of the innocent victims caught in the crossfire. But if I help him, what guarantee do I have that anything will change? What's to stop him from taking my money and continuing to treat me like an inconvenience? Nothing, Carol admitted. But maybe that's not the right question. What is the right question? Maybe the question is whether you can live with yourself, if you don't help, knowing that Madison will suffer for your pride, just like you've suffered for Michael's. The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. Pride had been the poison that infected every family relationship. Michael's pride in refusing to acknowledge his dependence on others, Ashley's pride in maintaining appearances over substance, and now Lydia's pride in protecting her dignity at any cost. How do I know the difference between helping and enabling? Conditions, Carol said without hesitation. You help, but with clear expectations and consequences. You make it a loan rather than a gift. You require family counseling. You insist on respect going forward. And if he refuses the conditions, then you'll know he wasn't really asking for help. He was asking for a bailout. And those are very different things. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. Lydia found herself thinking about Robert, about the values he'd tried to instill during their too-short marriage. He'd believed in second chances but not third ones, in helping people who were willing to help themselves but not in enabling destructive behavior. I should call Pastor Thompson, Lydia said finally. Get some spiritual guidance before I make any decisions. Good idea. But Lydia? Carol reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with. Both ways. Don't let fear of being taken advantage of prevent you from being the person you want to be. After Carol left, Lydia sat alone in her kitchen, with the weight of financial power pressing down on her like a physical force. The money upstairs could change everything, save Michael's business, preserve Madison's stability, potentially heal wounds that had seemed irreparable just hours ago. But it could also perpetuate the cycle of taking and giving that had brought them to this crisis in the first place. As evening shadows lengthened across her garden, Lydia realized she was facing the most important decision of her life since Robert's death. Not just whether to help her son, but what kind of woman she wanted to be. One who loved conditionally or unconditionally. One who protected herself or protected her family. One who held grudges or extended grace. The phone rang, startling her from her contemplation. Pastor Thompson's name appeared on the caller ID, as if her earlier thought had summoned him. Lydia, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I heard through the church network that Ashley was at your house today, and that it didn't go well. News travels fast in a small town. Good news and bad news both. Are you all right? I'm trying to figure out what all right looks like, she admitted. Pastor Thompson, can I ask you something about forgiveness? About the difference between turning the other cheek and enabling someone to keep hurting you. That's one of the hardest questions in Christian ethics, he replied thoughtfully. Why don't I come over? Some conversations are too important for the telephone. As Lydia waited for Pastor Thompson's arrival, she found herself standing again at her bedroom window, looking out at the garden where she'd planted hope alongside roses, where she'd tended growth through seasons of plenty and drought. Soon she would have to decide whether the money upstairs was a tool for healing or a weapon for enabling, whether love meant rescuing her son or letting him save himself. Either way, the decision would define not just Michael's future, but her own understanding of what it meant to be a mother, a woman, and a person of faith in a world where love and wisdom didn't always point in the same direction. Michael Hoffman sat in his truck outside the First National Bank of Peoria, staring at the imposing brick facade that had once represented possibility and partnership, but now felt like a monument to his failure. The manila folder on his passenger seat contained the final notice. His business loan was in default. The collateral would be seized within 72 hours, and his 15 years of building Hoffman Construction would officially end with the liquidation of equipment and the dissolution of dreams. The irony wasn't lost on him, that this was the same bank where his mother had co-signed his first equipment loan 16 years ago, sitting beside him in her best navy dress, while he fidgeted with nervous energy and boundless optimism. That loan had been for $12,000, a sum that had seemed enormous then, but now felt like pocket change compared to the $500,000 catastrophe that threatened to swallow everything he'd built. His phone buzzed with another text from Ashley. Conference with Madison's school counselor at 3 p.m. Her grades are falling and she's been caught crying in class. Fix this. The all-caps demand felt like a physical blow. His daughter, the bright, ambitious girl who had always been his source of pride and hope, was cracking under the pressure of adult problems she shouldn't have to understand. Meanwhile, his wife's solution to their crisis seemed to involve increasingly frantic attempts to maintain their social facade while quietly planning their exit strategy. Ashley had shown him the apartment listings that morning, modest two-bedroom places in neighborhoods they'd driven through but never considered living in. Temporary, she'd insisted, though her research into schools and shopping centers suggested otherwise. Just until we get back on our feet. But there were no feet to get back on. The Henderson lawsuit had metastasized into a legal nightmare that consumed every asset and credit line they possessed. Jake Miller had delivered the final verdict yesterday. Unless they could produce a miracle in the form of substantial capital injection, Hoffman Construction would be bankrupt by Christmas. Michael's phone rang, the screen displaying Jake's contact information. He let it go to voicemail, unable to face another conversation about legal strategies they couldn't afford and solutions that didn't exist. The voicemail notification joined 17 others he hadn't returned, a digital monument to his inability to face the reality that his pride had created. But it was the next call, from Madison's school, that finally broke through his paralysis. The guidance counselor's voice was gentle but concerned. Madison had been found crying in the hallway between classes, and when pressed, had admitted she was worried about her parents getting divorced and having to move away from all her friends. Mr. Hoffman, I realize family stress can be difficult, but Madison is clearly struggling with some significant anxiety. She mentioned something about financial troubles at home. Sometimes, children carry burdens that aren't theirs to bear. The counselor's words echoed in Michael's mind as he finally started his truck and began the aimless driving that had become his default response to crisis. He found himself taking familiar routes through Peoria, past construction sites where his crews had worked, past neighborhoods where he'd built decks and additions, past the elementary school where his mother had taught for 4 decades. Without conscious decision, he turned onto Maple Street. His mother's house looked exactly the same as it had 2 months ago, yet somehow different in ways he couldn't articulate. The lawn was perfectly maintained, the flower beds showed evidence of recent attention, and there was something about the overall appearance that suggested life being lived rather than merely endured. He parked across the street, engine running, paralyzed by the weight of everything that would need to be said and unsaid to bridge the chasm that his words had created. "You're just a burden now." The phrase had become a haunting refrain, following him through sleepless nights and anxious days, a reminder of the moment when his character had been tested and found wanting. 3 times he reached for his phone to call her. 3 times he lost his nerve and set it back down. What did you say to someone you'd hurt so profoundly? How did you ask for help from someone you'd dismissed as irrelevant to your life? The 4th time, he actually dialed her number before hanging up after the first ring, his courage failing at the sound of her voicemail greeting. The familiar voice, patient, warm, offering to return calls promptly, felt like an accusation of everything he'd thrown away in service of Ashley's vision of upward mobility. Pastor Thompson's white sedan, turning into the driveway, provided an unwelcome complication. Michael watched as the minister climbed out of his car, carrying what appeared to be a covered dish and wearing the expression of someone arriving for a planned visit, rather than a pastoral emergency. The sight of Pastor Thompson entering his mother's house, walking through the door Michael had stormed out of in anger and wounded pride, crystallized the extent of his isolation. While he'd been cutting family ties and burning bridges, his mother had apparently been building new relationships, finding sources of support and community that didn't depend on his approval or participation. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Hoffman, this is Janet Phillips from Henderson & Associates. We need to discuss settlement terms immediately. Call me today or we proceed with full litigation Monday morning." The legal deadline felt like a countdown timer on his entire life. Monday morning. 4 days to find $500,000 or watch everything disappear into bankruptcy proceedings and legal judgments. He was still sitting in his truck, paralyzed by indecision, when Pastor Thompson emerged from the house 90 minutes later. The minister noticed Michael's truck immediately, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to recognition to something that might have been disappointment. Pastor Thompson approached the truck without hesitation, his stride carrying the purposeful energy of someone who'd made a decision. Michael rolled down his window, feeling like a teenager caught skipping school. "Michael, I thought that was your truck." Pastor Thompson's voice carried no judgment, but Michael felt exposed nonetheless. "What brings you to your mother's neighborhood?" "I was just driving around, thinking." "Thinking about anything in particular?" The gentle question invited confession, but Michael found himself unable to form words that would adequately explain the magnitude of his crisis, or the depth of his regret. "How did you tell someone that you'd destroyed your most important relationship during the exact moment when you needed it most?" "Things are difficult right now," he said finally. "So I've heard. The church prayer chain has been active on your family's behalf." The knowledge that his personal failures had become the subject of congregational concern felt like another weight added to an already crushing load. "I didn't know people were talking about it." "People care about you, Michael, about your whole family. Your mother especially has been in a lot of prayers lately." The mention of his mother felt like a knife to his chest. "How is she?" "Why don't you ask her yourself?" Pastor Thompson's suggestion was gentle but pointed. "She's right inside, and I suspect she'd welcome the conversation." "I don't think that's a good idea, after what happened." "After you said some things you regret while under tremendous stress." Pastor Thompson's expression remained kind. "Michael, I've known you since you were 8 years old. You're not a cruel person by nature. You're a frightened person who made a mistake. It was more than a mistake. The things I said can be forgiven if you're willing to ask for forgiveness." The simple statement hung in the air between them, offering hope and terror in equal measure. Michael wanted to believe that redemption was possible, that love could survive the kind of betrayal he'd inflicted, but the gulf between wanting something and believing it was possible felt insurmountable. "What if she says no? What if I've damaged things beyond repair?" "Then you'll know." "But Michael, the uncertainty you're living with now isn't sustainable. You're carrying the weight of guilt and regret, along with whatever business pressures you're facing. That's more than anyone can bear alone." Pastor Thompson was right, though Michael couldn't bring himself to admit it aloud. The isolation he'd created through his choices had made every problem larger, every crisis more frightening, every solution more elusive. Pride had become a luxury he couldn't afford, but letting go of it felt like surrendering the last piece of identity he had left. "I should go," Michael said, reaching for his truck's gear shift. "Michael!" Pastor Thompson's voice stopped him. "Your mother is one of the strongest, most forgiving people I know. But she's also learned some things about self-respect these past months. If you're going to approach her, do it with genuine humility and honest intentions. Don't ask for what you're not prepared to earn." After Pastor Thompson left, Michael sat alone in his truck as darkness gathered around Maple Street. Lights came on in houses up and down the block, families settling in for evening routines, children finishing homework, parents navigating the ordinary challenges of daily life. His mother's house glowed warmly in the gathering dusk, and through the kitchen window he could see her moving around with the purposeful energy of someone preparing dinner for one. The sight filled him with an unexpected sadness, not just for what he'd lost, but for what he'd never properly appreciated when he had it. He thought about Madison, crying in school hallways because her parents' failures had become her burden. He thought about Ashley, researching apartments and school districts while maintaining the fiction that their crisis was temporary. He thought about Jake Miller, who'd built a business partnership on trust and friendship only to watch it crumble under the weight of Michael's poor decisions. But mostly he thought about the woman in that warmly lit kitchen who had loved him unconditionally for 45 years, who had sacrificed her own security to help him achieve his dreams, who had endured months of increasing coldness and disrespect before finally being driven away by his cruelty. The woman he needed more than anyone else in the world, and who had every reason to refuse him. Michael's hands shook as he turned off his truck's engine. The walk to his mother's front door felt like the longest distance he'd ever traveled, each step carrying the weight of everything that had been broken, and everything that might possibly be repaired. The porch light came on as he approached, motion activated, but it felt like invitation. He stood before the door where he'd been welcomed thousands of times, raised his hand to knock, and realized he was about to discover whether love could survive the worst version of himself. The knock echoed through the house like a question that demanded an answer. After a moment, he heard footsteps approaching, lighter than he remembered, quicker, and then the door opened to reveal his mother. She looked different. Smaller somehow, but also more substantial. Her hair was shorter, more stylish. Her clothes were newer, and her eyes, the eyes that had once looked at him with unconditional adoration, now held something he'd never seen before: wariness. Michael. Her voice was careful, neutral, revealing nothing of what she might be thinking or feeling. Mom. The word caught in his throat. Could we talk? She studied his face for a long moment, and Michael realized she was assessing him the way she might evaluate a stranger asking for help, with compassion, but also with caution. It's late, she said finally. I know. I'm sorry. I really need to talk to you. Lydia Hoffman looked at her son, truly looked at him, for the first time in months. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the defeat in his posture, the desperation he was trying so hard to hide. She saw the boy who used to come to her with broken toys and scraped knees, trusting that his mother could fix anything that was broken. And despite everything that had happened, despite all the hurt and anger and disappointment, she stepped aside and let him in. We can talk, she said quietly. But Michael, this time, we're going to tell each other the truth. The living room felt smaller than Michael remembered. Or perhaps he had simply grown accustomed to the expansive spaces that Ashley had insisted they needed to, quote, live properly. Sitting on the same sofa where he'd once sprawled as a teenager watching television, surrounded by photographs chronicling a lifetime of family moments, he felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment pressing down on him like a physical force. Lydia settled into her reading chair, the same chair where she'd graded papers by lamplight during his childhood, where she'd waited up for him during his rebellious teenage years, and regarded him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but not welcoming either. Careful. Guarded. The look of someone who had learned the hard way that love without boundaries was just another form of self-destruction. You look terrible, she said without preamble, her teacher's directness cutting through any pretense he might have constructed. I feel terrible. The admission escaped before he could filter it, raw and honest in a way that surprised them both. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Or slept more than a few hours at a time? The questions carried echoes of the mother he remembered, the woman who had monitored his health and happiness with unwavering attention, who had somehow always known when he was struggling even before he admitted it to himself. But there was distance in her concern now, the careful compassion of someone extending help without expectation of reciprocation. I don't remember, he said truthfully. The last few weeks have been difficult. I heard about the Henderson project, about the lawsuit. Of course she had. In a town the size of Peoria, business failures were as public as engagement announcements, dissected and analyzed in coffee shops and church basements, until everyone knew the details whether they wanted to or not. How much do you know? He asked. Enough to understand that you're facing bankruptcy, that Ashley is looking at apartments, that Madison is crying in school because she doesn't understand why her world is falling apart. The last observation hit him like a physical blow. You know about Madison? News travels fast when it involves children, especially when those children are asking their guidance counselors whether their family will have to move away before graduation. Michael buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the cascade of failures that had touched every aspect of his life. The business crisis had started as a professional problem, but it had metastasized into something that threatened to destroy his daughter's sense of security, his marriage's foundation, and his own understanding of who he was supposed to be. I never wanted any of this to affect her, he said through his fingers. But it has affected her. It's affected everyone in your family, including the people you've pushed away. The gentle rebuke felt worse than outright anger would have. Michael looked up to find his mother watching him, with an expression that mixed sadness with something that might have been resignation. Mom, I need to tell you something. About that Sunday, about the things I said. You called me a burden. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, but Michael could hear the echo of pain beneath the calm exterior. You suggested I belonged in an assisted living facility. You made it clear that my presence in your life was an inconvenience that you no longer wanted to tolerate. Each word felt like a slap, made worse by the clinical accuracy with which she delivered them. I was wrong. I was under pressure, and I said things. You said what you really thought. Lydia's interruption was gentle but firm. People don't usually lie when they're angry, Michael. They tell truths they've been hiding when they thought politeness required it. That's not true. I don't think you're a burden. I never thought that. Then where did those words come from? How does someone accidentally suggest their mother move to a care facility unless they've been thinking about it for a while? The question hung in the air between them, demanding an honesty that Michael wasn't sure he was prepared to offer. But the careful way his mother was watching him, as if she were evaluating whether he was capable of genuine accountability, suggested that half-truths and deflections wouldn't be sufficient. Ashley had been saying things, he admitted finally, about how our Sunday dinners were becoming a burden on our family time. About how you were getting more dependent as you got older. About how we needed to think about what was best for everyone. And you agreed with her. I thought I was protecting my marriage. I thought if I didn't set some boundaries with you, it would cause problems between Ashley and me. So you chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. The blunt summary made his choices sound even worse than they had felt at the time. It wasn't that simple. Wasn't it? Lydia leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp and unforgiving. Michael, for months before that Sunday, I watched you gradually pull away. Shorter visits, less conversation, more criticism about everything from my cooking to my housekeeping. I saw you letting Ashley make subtle digs about my age, my abilities, my place in your lives. I was trying to keep peace in my family. I was your family too. Or I thought I was. The past tense hit him like a punch to the chest. You're still my family. You're my mother. Being someone's mother doesn't guarantee a place in their life, Michael. I've learned that these past 2 months. What do you mean? Lydia rose from her chair and moved to the window overlooking her garden, her posture straight despite the weight of everything they were discussing. I mean that after you left that Sunday, after I spent 3 days in my nightgown wondering what I'd done wrong, I realized something important. I realized that I'd been trying so hard to earn your approval that I'd forgotten to require your respect. You always had my respect. No, I didn't. Respect doesn't involve tolerating subtle cruelty for the sake of keeping peace. Respect doesn't mean accepting less than you deserve, because you're afraid of losing what little you have left. Michael found himself studying his mother's profile as she looked out at her garden, seeing her perhaps more clearly than he had in years. There was something different about her, a confidence he didn't remember, a sense of self-possession that seemed to have emerged from the ashes of their relationship. You seem... He struggled for the right words. Different. Stronger, maybe. I am stronger. I had to become stronger, because the alternative was disappearing entirely into other people's expectations. I never wanted you to disappear. Lydia turned from the window to face him directly. But you wanted me to be smaller, more convenient, less demanding of your time and attention. You wanted me to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection you were willing to offer, without ever asking for the kind of relationship I actually needed. The accuracy of her assessment was devastating. Michael realized that without ever consciously deciding to do so, he had gradually reshaped his relationship with his mother to fit Ashley's preferences and his own convenience, treating her presence as an obligation rather than a gift. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate even as he spoke them. I'm sorry for taking you for granted. I'm sorry for letting Ashley influence how I treated you. I'm sorry for saying you were a burden when you've never been anything but supportive. I appreciate that. But Michael, apologies don't undo damage. They're just the first step toward acknowledging that damage was done. Then what's the second step? The second step is understanding why the damage happened in the first place, so it doesn't happen again. Michael felt like a student being guided through a difficult lesson, with his mother as the teacher who wouldn't let him skip past the hard parts to get to the easy resolution. I think it happened because I was weak. Because I let other people's opinions matter more than doing what was right. That's part of it. But I think it also happened because you stopped seeing me as a person, with my own needs and feelings. I became a role in your life, mother, rather than an individual who deserved consideration and respect. The observation hit home with painful clarity. When had he stopped thinking about what his mother might need or want, focusing instead on what was expected of him as a son, or what was convenient for his immediate family? How do I fix it? He asked quietly. You start by being honest about what you actually want from this conversation. The challenge in her voice made him look up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that you didn't drive to my house at 9 o'clock at night just to apologize. You're here because you need something, and I'd rather we be honest about that than pretend this is purely about reconciliation. The directness of her challenge caught him off guard. His mother had never been confrontational, never pushed for uncomfortable truths, or demanded explanations he wasn't ready to give. This version of Lydia Hoffman, clear-eyed and uncompromising, was someone he was still learning to recognize. You're right, he said finally. I do need something. I need help. What kind of help? Financial help. The lawsuit, the business. I'm going to lose everything unless I can come up with $500,000 by Monday morning. $500,000! She repeated the sum without inflection, as if testing how it sounded in the quiet of her living room. I know it's a lot. I know I have no right to ask, especially after everything that's happened. But Jake thinks if we can settle the lawsuit and cover the immediate debts, we might be able to save the business. And you think I have that kind of money? I don't know. Maybe? You've always been careful with finances, and there was Dad's life insurance. There was indeed. Lydia returned to her chair, settling back with the measured movements of someone who had anticipated this moment and prepared for it. $75,000, actually, plus my savings from 40 years of teaching. The specific amount hit Michael like a physical shock. He'd been hoping for help, but he hadn't dared imagine that his mother might actually possess the resources to make a real difference. Would you consider lending it to me? I know it's a lot to ask, but I'd pay it back with interest. I'd put everything in writing, make it completely legal. Michael. Her voice cut through his desperate planning. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about something else. We need to talk about whether you're actually sorry for how you treated me, or whether you're just sorry that you need my help. The question hit him like cold water, washing away the financial calculations and desperate strategizing to expose the raw nerve of his motivations. Was his regret genuine, or was it just another form of self-interest? I don't know, he admitted finally. I wish I could say it was pure remorse, but honestly, I don't know if I would have come here tonight if I wasn't desperate. At least that's honest. But Mom, I am sorry. Even if it took a crisis to make me realize it. I am genuinely sorry for treating you badly. For taking you for granted. For letting pride and stupidity cost me the most important relationship in my life. Lydia studied his face for a long moment, and Michael had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through to his soul. All the selfishness and weakness and desperate fear he'd been trying to hide from everyone, including himself. I have the money, she said finally. I have enough to solve your immediate crisis, and probably keep your business afloat for the next year if you're careful. Hope surged through Michael's chest like oxygen after drowning. Really? Really? But Michael, if I help you, and I'm not saying I will, it won't be because you're my son and I'm obligated to bail you out. It won't be because I feel guilty for letting you struggle. It will be because I believe you can learn from this experience and become the man I raised you to be. I can. I will. I swear to you, I'll do whatever it takes. What it takes is changing how you treat the people who love you. What it takes is valuing relationship over reputation. Character over convenience. What it takes is becoming someone worthy of the help you're asking for. Michael nodded eagerly, ready to agree to anything that might restore his mother's faith in him and his business's viability. But Lydia wasn't finished. And Michael, if I do help you, and you revert to treating me like a burden the moment your crisis passes, there won't be a second chance. I've learned too much about my own worth to accept that kind of treatment again. The warning was delivered quietly, but with the kind of finality that made it clear she meant every word. Michael looked at his mother, really looked at her, and realized that the woman sitting across from him had indeed become someone different over the past 2 months. Someone stronger, more self-possessed, less willing to accept less than she deserved. Someone who might actually be capable of walking away from him permanently if he betrayed her trust again. I understand, he said, and for the first time in months he felt like he actually did understand something important about love, respect, and the difference between them. Whether he would be able to live up to that understanding remained to be seen. But sitting in his mother's living room, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime of love he'd taken for granted, Michael Hoffman finally began to comprehend the true cost of what he'd almost lost forever. The kitchen table that had witnessed a lifetime of conversations, homework help, teenage confessions, holiday planning, now held a different kind of document. Lydia had written her conditions on cream-colored stationery, the same paper she'd used for thank you notes and sympathy cards, her careful teacher's handwriting transforming desperate need into structured possibility. Michael stared at the list, his coffee growing cold as he processed each requirement. 1. Family counseling. Minimum 6 months, all members participating. 2. Formal loan agreement, 3% interest, 7-year repayment term. 3. Monthly family dinners. Respectful participation from all parties. 4. Public acknowledgement to Madison and friends of wrongdoing. 5. Ashley must apologize personally for her treatment of Lydia. These aren't suggestions, Lydia said quietly, watching her son's face as he read. They're requirements, non-negotiable. Family counseling, Michael repeated, his voice tight. Mom, Ashley will never agree to that. Then Ashley will have to decide what matters more, her pride or your family's survival. And the public acknowledgement part. He looked up from the paper. You want me to tell Madison that I was wrong to cut you off? I want you to tell the truth. That your treatment of your mother was unacceptable. And that you're working to become a better person. Lydia's voice carried steel beneath the gentleness. Madison needs to understand that adult relationships require accountability, not just apologies. Michael's hands shook slightly as he set the paper down. The money, $75,000 that could save everything, was within reach, but the price felt almost unbearable. Not the financial cost, but the emotional one. The requirement that he publicly admit failure, that he submit to counseling, that he allow his mother to set the terms of their reconciliation. What if Ashley refuses? What if she says the conditions are too demanding? Then you'll learn something important about what your wife values most. The simple statement hung between them, carrying implications that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to face. His marriage had been built on shared ambitions and social aspirations. But this crisis was testing whether it contained anything deeper. Love that could survive vulnerability, partnership that could weather actual adversity. I need to call her, he said finally. Use the kitchen phone. I want to hear this conversation. Michael blinked in surprise. Mom, that's not necessary. It absolutely is necessary. I'm not agreeing to help based on what you tell me, Ashley said. I need to hear her actual words, her actual commitment. Lydia's expression was implacable. Michael, trust has to be rebuilt from the ground up. That means transparency, even when it's uncomfortable. With trembling fingers, Michael dialed his home number. Ashley answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with anxiety. Where are you? It's almost 10 o'clock. I'm at Mom's house. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael could practically hear Ashley's mind racing, calculating the implications of his location and the potential complications it represented. Why? She asked finally. Because I need to ask for her help. Ashley, the situation is worse than we discussed. We need $500,000 by Monday, and Mom has money. Enough to save the business. She has $500,000? Ashley's voice rose with disbelief and something that might have been anger. How long has she been sitting on that kind of money while watching us struggle? It doesn't matter how long. What matters is that she's willing to help. But there are conditions. What kind of conditions? Michael looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. Family counseling. All of us. And she wants an apology from you for how you've treated her. The silence stretched longer this time, filled with the weight of years of accumulated resentment and carefully maintained superiority. When Ashley finally spoke, her voice was tight with controlled fury. She wants me to apologize? For what, exactly? For trying to protect our family from her increasing demands? For recognizing that she was becoming a burden on our marriage? Ashley, Michael said quietly, aware of his mother's sharp attention. She was never a burden. We made her feel like one because it was convenient for us. Don't you dare lecture me about convenience. I've spent 15 years building the life we have, maintaining the relationships that matter for your business, creating the kind of home that reflects success. And now we're about to lose all of it, because that success was built on credit and appearances instead of actual value. The truth hit its target with devastating accuracy. Ashley's breathing became audible through the phone, quick and shallow with panic or rage. Fine, she said finally. If groveling to your mother is what it takes to save our house, I'll do it. But Michael, if we get through this, we're having a serious conversation about boundaries and family priorities. The counseling too, Michael pressed. 6 months minimum. Family counseling is expensive. Mom's covering it as part of the loan terms. Another pause, longer this time. She's really thought this through, hasn't she? Yes, she has. Put her on the phone. Michael looked at his mother, who nodded and took the receiver with steady hands. Hello, Ashley. Mrs. Hoffman. Ashley's voice carried forced formality. Michael says you're willing to help with our financial situation. I'm willing to make a loan to preserve my granddaughter's stability and give my son a chance to rebuild his character along with his business. Those are some pretty specific conditions for family help. Those are the requirements for earning my trust back. And Ashley, let me be very clear. This money comes with expectations about how your family treats me going forward. The days of accepting subtle disrespect for the sake of keeping peace are over. Michael watched his mother's face as she spoke, seeing a strength he'd forgotten she possessed. This wasn't the accommodating woman who had gradually shrunk herself to fit into their lives. This was the teacher who had commanded respect from hundreds of students, the single mother who had raised him with firm boundaries and unwavering love. I understand, Ashley said finally, though her tone suggested she understood only that compliance was necessary, not that she accepted the legitimacy of the demands. I hope you do. Because Ashley, this is the only offer you're going to get from me. Take it or leave it, but decide quickly. Michael's business doesn't have time for extended negotiations. After Ashley hung up, promising to discuss the terms and call back within an hour, Lydia returned to her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had finally stopped allowing others to dictate the terms of her relationships. That went better than I expected, she said. Did it? She agreed. Reluctantly, with obvious resentment, but she agreed. Sometimes, that's the most you can ask for in the beginning. Michael stared at the conditions list again, trying to imagine his family in counseling, Ashley apologizing to his mother, himself admitting publicly that he'd been wrong. It felt like emotional surgery without anesthesia, necessary for healing, but almost unbearable to contemplate. Mom, he said quietly, thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 6 months, if you've actually changed. Thank me when Madison feels secure again. Thank me when your family has learned to function with honesty instead of pretense. As they waited for Ashley's return call, Michael found himself looking around the kitchen that had sheltered so many important conversations, realizing that this might be the most important one of all. The moment when love stopped being unconditional and started requiring accountability, when help came with the expectation of growth rather than just gratitude. Outside, Peoria settled into another quiet evening, unaware that in a small house on Maple Street, a family was taking the first tentative steps toward learning the difference between loving someone and enabling them, between keeping peace and demanding respect. The phone would ring soon with Ashley's final answer. But for now, Michael sat with his mother in the kitchen, where he'd learned his first lessons about right and wrong, preparing to discover whether those lessons had taken root deeply enough to survive the test of real adversity. The Sunday dinner table looked almost identical to the one from 6 months ago. Same china, same silverware, same mahogany surface polished to a warm gleam. But everything else had changed in ways both subtle and profound, creating an atmosphere that felt familiar, yet entirely new. Lydia moved between kitchen and dining room with the same graceful efficiency she'd always possessed. But there was something lighter in her step now, a confidence that came from knowing her presence was truly welcome rather than merely tolerated. Her hair caught the afternoon light streaming through windows she'd recently had professionally cleaned, and the soft blue dress she wore was another purchase from her shopping trips with Carol, evidence of a woman who had learned to value herself enough to invest in her own happiness. "Grandma, the potatoes are perfect," Madison announced, serving herself a generous portion while sneaking an appreciative glance at her grandmother. At 17 now, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had watched her family navigate real crisis and emerge stronger. Her college acceptance letter to Bradley University's education program sat framed on Lydia's mantle, a testament to dreams that had survived family turbulence. "Thank you, sweetheart. Though I had excellent help today." Lydia smiled at Ashley, who was setting down a bowl of green beans she'd actually helped prepare, a small miracle that 6 months of family counseling had made possible. Ashley's transformation had been the most dramatic of all. The woman who had once criticized every aspect of Lydia's hospitality now moved through the kitchen with respectful efficiency, her designer clothes replaced by comfortable slacks and a simple sweater that suggested someone who had learned the difference between looking successful and actually living well. "The business is back in the black," Michael reported, accepting the gravy boat from his mother with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Jake thinks we'll be able to pay off the loan 6 months early if the Henderson settlement comes through as expected." "That's wonderful, but don't rush the repayment," Lydia replied. "I'd rather see you building proper reserves than scrambling to settle debts ahead of schedule." The easy exchange of financial information represented another hard-won victory. The loan agreement had evolved into something more collaborative than transactional, with Lydia offering business advice that Michael now accepted with gratitude rather than defensiveness. Jake Miller joined them for dessert, his presence adding to the sense of expanded family that had emerged from the ashes of their previous dysfunction. He brought flowers for Lydia and updates on the community garden project that had become her latest passion, a collaboration with the church that provided fresh vegetables for the food bank. As afternoon faded into evening, Lydia found herself studying the faces around her table. Her son, who had learned humility, her daughter-in-law, who had discovered that respect was more valuable than status, her granddaughter, who was thriving in an environment of honest communication. The conversation flowed naturally from Madison's college preparations to Michael's latest construction project to Ashley's new part-time job at the church, work she'd initially accepted reluctantly but now approached with genuine enthusiasm. "Next Sunday," Madison announced as they cleared dishes together, "I want to cook the entire meal myself. Grandma can supervise, but I want to prove I remember everything she taught me." Looking around her kitchen, filled with family members who had chosen to be there rather than felt obligated, Lydia realized she had found something infinitely more valuable than what she'd lost. She had found a relationship based on mutual respect rather than duty, love that was freely given rather than desperately sought. The Sunday dinners would continue, but now they celebrated connection rather than mere tradition. And that, Lydia thought as Madison hugged her goodnight, made all the difference in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,